Hello, my friends. I'm Rick, and this is your seat at the table, and we're looking at yet another technical readout. Technical readout vehicle Annex, the revised edition. This one was revised and produced by Catalyst, although I understand that this is not a Catalyst product. That this is just a revision of a FanPro product. And notice that it's obviously a PDF. Maybe you don't notice it, but it is a PDF. And I was watching a video that Critical Rocket did here a couple weeks ago, and on a land train, basically a civilian vehicle that you might encounter someplace in some various worlds of the inner sphere, and he was doing it the video a bit reluctantly. I guess because some of his subscribers had asked for it or petitioned it or however it worked out. And I think I've asked this before because I don't know if it was Critical Rocket or who it was, but somebody else told me that this existed, and I went and looked at it like a year ago, and I wasn't keen on the PDFs. I'm still not keen on PDFs for a number of reasons. As long as I have the means to print them out, it's not nearly as bad in some ways. But you've seen some of my previous PDF videos, and you'll notice a significant difference: the binding. So once again, it should not have been surprising because my own personal game system uses a binding setup like this. So on a lark last month, I went online and I was looking to see just what these damn machines cost, and I was actually surprised to be able to get a fairly decent looking, robust looking machine for about $70. And I thought, let's go ahead and do that. And because I don't, the big binders are bulky and they cost a lot of money when you add the cost of the binder and all them sleeves that go into them and the time. Well, at the end of the day, I could have paid for this machine already. And these things, you can get 100 of these things for like $20. So it was worth the effort to purchase. Now, I'm not completely figured out how to print the damn things out because when it printed out, it printed the pages kind of like this. The shit, instead of being, anyway, there's issues with it. So as a vehicle annex, it says in the opening material, it tells you that this is geared mostly for MechWarrior and not BattleTech itself, because it's not likely that you would encounter these sort of things as a threat to your mechs on a tabletop war game. Although there's a number of items in here that could absolutely work into tabletop war games, either as a target or something that's part of the battlefield that's interfering with your whatever. So we got our instructions and game rules, wheeled support vehicles, and then of course, we got the video or the visual, and then the stats. Ideally, if I was hoping to print them so it would lay out and in such a way that you could read the stats and then see the picture of it. And it's not quite panning out that way, but it's a work in progress. I am not going to go and reprint this all over again because this is a lot of cartridge ink for even for the Xerox machine, and I'm not trying to get myself in Dutch with my boss. I don't want to abuse a privilege that I have, but we're looking at a lot of basically civilian mundane vehicles. But if you're operating any kind of significant force, you're likely to have a lot of support vehicles that don't see the battlefield tabletop version itself, although there would be scenarios when that would be quite viable. And to have these things to be able to populate the battlefield, or like in an urban setting to make use of, is not such a bad idea. Not to mention that from the prospect of if you are doing mech war, then obviously they do have a lot more impact and things like this. But we're looking at armored cars like Brinks car, and here's a ambulance and fire engine, and here is some kind of box truck, in this case turned into a command and control unit for a pseudo military. Here's a version of a land train, and industrial vehicles and stuff that we would find big old dump trucks and stuff. And if you've got a big enough, if you have a Merc command or even a house command, and you're operating with a regimental size unit with support, odds are pretty good. You have engineer unit, you have equipment and machinery that's part of your table of organization, your TOE, and not war machines. And so take into account. We go back to that suspending belief thing for things like transporting stuff. So when we're looking at transporting an entire regiment and their support equipment from one planet to the next, how many dropships does it take? Because it's not just the mechs you're hauling. You're hauling the mechs, you're hauling all your infantry and your MechWarriors and all the technicians and their supplies and their consumables and the equipment they need to repair and maintain the mechs on the field. And if you're looking at an extended regiment that's got armored vehicles and soft body vehicles, they just don't go to another planet and requisition them. Although if you're a house, that could very well happen. You could easily go to, if you're supporting in another house or inside your own house operations, to move between worlds and then quote borrow support units from the either the locals or from the local militia or something like that, and then you wouldn't need to truck all this stuff around. But it potentially, you would, and or it'd have some elements thereof, right? And of course, a lot of these, if you look, when I look at them right off the bat, is I think, well, these are still some kind of civilian version of armored vehicles and combat vehicles. And then we get into some pretty crazy stuff, but makes sense too. I mean, here's one for operating on an airless world. And when we're dealing with, some of these, this is a huge kind of harvester thing, or almost kind of looks like one of them sand crawlers from Dune, right? Yeah, spice harvester. Anyway, so the idea is that these machines would exist potentially as resources to be used and things like this, but it also opens up different environments and equipment and things like this that we take for granted or we just don't think about. This was the land train that Critical Rocket was reviewing, and if I think about it, I'll put a link to that particular video so you can go and enjoy it yourself. And by all means, if you don't already subscribe to Critical Rocket, I'd be surprised. But if you don't, you really should go look at his stuff. His stuff is top notch. Definitely worth giving it a look and a like, and maybe even subscribing to his channel, because hey, somebody's channel should really grow. Hey, don't get me wrong, I'm grateful. My God, my channel's added almost 200 subscribers since I started doing the BattleTech stuff, and I'm grateful for it. Don't get me wrong. It's just, I look at other people's stuff and they're not any better or worse than my stuff, but they got thousands of subscribers, and I don't know. I've been at it as long as them. I just don't get out as much as they do, I guess. I don't know. I don't care. It is what it is. I don't care. So, it's just the sheer amount of stuff that's going on, and it also gives us some visuals. So not only are we looking at visuals, so here's a swamp skimmer, but I'm looking at the background visuals too. So when we look at alien worlds and things like this, when we talk about BattleTech, a lot of times we miss the panoramic views and the true exotic locales and locations that are normal within the inner sphere, but they don't translate over much into BattleTech combat scenarios, because they just don't. So we don't. They're just one big huge city after a city, but we don't look at them from what would a city look like that's 600 years in the future, all right, as opposed to what we see in now. How would things drastically change? Well, how much would 600 years of never-ending conflict alter certain things too? So we got news helos and cargo transports. Once again, great machines, great equipment, stuff that would be quite common on many worlds, both developed and on the frontier, and find uses for these things for your tabletop game and for your MechWarrior campaigns and stuff. I mean, it makes perfectly good sense. And then of course that's a heavily armed police helicopter. It has a peacekeeper SWAT carrier armed with missile launchers. Right? Okay. Passenger VTOLs and nothing wrong with that. Here's a firefighting VTOL. Why not? Well, I imagine they would need them, especially when you've got crazy people sending regiments of mechs out into the woods to fight each other. Quicksilver personal sports craft, medium patrol craft, Heavy transports. See, now we're getting somewhere. We got airship support vehicles. Metals manned dirigible. Dixon law enforcement fire tender. Sure. Right. In an era when anti-gravity has never been designed, VTOLs and dirigibles should predominate. And they, why wouldn't they? I mean, I think that there's another thing. When I tried to learn to bind these things, some of my binding was off just a hair, but still, I think it'll take up less space on my shelf, and it makes this easier for me to take with me and preview and stuff like that when I'm at work, and just the I like to. I think this is the way to go with PDFs. If you're into PDFs and you do this, and you do have a habit of printing some of them out, this is well worth doing. This is the particular. This is one of the bigger binder rings they have, but the ones that came with the box itself are like a third the size of this. So I can do small ones and big ones, and not, got quite a few of these things. So there's a number. There's a number of smaller free stuff that Catalyst puts out. And it's 20, 30 pages, 15 pages. In my head, I was like, I don't want to print all this, so what am I going to do with it? I'd have one big thick binder with a bunch of little things in it, but it's one of those things that might be worth doing now, that I have a way to put them together in such a way that I will be able to utilize for years to come. Years to come. So we got high speed and medevacs, luxury jets, airliners. Here's the Air Transport the King Karnov. So this is the civilian version of the military version, right? And long haul cargo craft, Torrent heavy bomber. Sure, so let's throw a bomber in with a bunch of civilian vehicles. Okay, and satellite support vehicles. Then we get into a section of BattleTech that I think has long been underutilized space. Now I know that it's not popular to. This thing's shifting on me. Yeah. My camera just sits up here on the edge of this light. I haven't quite nailed it down because sometimes I want to move the light a little bit, right? And I don't know. Did the cat bump it or did I bump it? It's just bumping. Oh, that's too much. See, that's what this is my light. All right. So a lot of this stuff is we take it for granted. We know it's there. We ignore it. ComSat, science satellites, communication satellites. I mean, here's a power sat. It almost looks like it's upside down, even though it's not picture-wise. See, I got the pictures facing me, so they're not upside down. There is a warning satellite, Cassion payload satellite. Rail support vehicles, also things that would be quite common. I think there's one novel, one source book that the Grey Death in the Grey Death Legion series, where they actually make use of a planetary maglev to transport their forces back across the planet, so they can concentrate to deal with an enemy. And so that just goes to show you that they do exist, and that they're often used in military applications. And so here's an aquatic environment. You don't see that too much in the novels or in conflict. Well, we see there's a few clips here and there where they'll fight underwater and things like that. But imagine if the whole environment's that way, and you've got a water world that you're literally, all the action takes place on the surface of the below the water. This yes, is that the surface or the subsurface? Yeah, wherever. So then we get into some naval surface vessels. Speaking of water vessels, that was something that very early 3025 or the vehicle guide had tried to accommodate a few submersibles, a few surface-going vessels. For the most part, with the advent of aerospace fighters and drop ships, any kind of surface vessel, especially in the age of if you got a warship, are screwed. They really, they sound great, but they have massive carriers and cruisers and stuff. On a surface, a wet water navy, so to speak, are going to be at a distinct disadvantage when stuff can just stay up in orbit and rain down on you, or get high above and rain down on you. But that doesn't mean that they wouldn't exist and take away from them. And so this is where this book helps to breach a little bit of that. You got a whaler ship here. Here's a heavy cruiser. So you can get a little bit of a picture. Here's a tanker. Here's a super carrier for fighters and jets. This makes perfectly good sense. I mean, for a lot of aspects, there's a lot of worlds where that stuff would take place. Now we get into some submersibles. So a personal submersible, and here's a passenger submarine. Here's a cargo sub. Here's a missile submarine. You know, it's carrier submarine. What's that? Well, that wind really kicking up out there. That's what's making the next. Sorry, Sissy. I got Sissy, the neighbor cat, sitting up there. Hi, Sissy. Say hi to everybody. Right? Yes, you kind of look like a bit like Frankie, but she's not Frankie by any means. That is Sissy. I call her really a little less poetic name, and this is not for kids. You don't like it? Kick rocks. Like I said, this is neighbor pussy. Ain't you neighbor pussy? I'll scream out there. This one and the big black fluffy one we got, who looks, I swear, has got a lot of Maine Coon in him. Just Maine Coon, as big as he is, as beefy as his head is, and fluffy as he is. How he's not. My wife keeps saying, "Oh, that Fluffy's her kitten." And ain't no way that big behemoth came out of this gal. But him and this one actually belong to the lady next to us, to the east of us, and she apparently has 4 or 5 cats in her house now, and they don't like being over there. So they spend all their time over here, and next thing I know, they're living in our house. And my wife lets them out a little bit every day when the weather's nice, and then she frets the whole time they're out there, and then gets them back in as soon as she gets an excuse to leave them in the house. And that just brings our internal house count up to frickin' 5. You know, it is what it is. So anyway, Sissy's pretty behaved, although she tends to not like the other cats that much. She hisses at them if they get too close. And engineering exoskeletons. Combat exoskeletons. See, now here's a section that from the earlier FASTA days we kind of lacked. We did lack. It wasn't until later that they started introducing more personal and interactive equipment that would be quite commonplace for, like, the replacement for the modern forklift, for example, would be a loader mech, something all of the Alien movie kind of lift. And to find things like this, I expect to see them to be quite common, and to be able to utilize these things and military applications and stuff like that makes perfectly good sense too. I mean, if I have a logistics group that's supporting my unit, and I don't have a very big one, if they're all augmented by exoskeletons, then they can do a whole lot of stuff. A handful of people can do a lot more stuff and justify it in my head. So here, heavy hauler, power loader, you know, here's a tunnel rat mining and here's a rescue unit, rescue body armor, and here's the fleece version of the body armor. Then we get into industrial mechs, service mech. This was another thing that I always thought was underutilized in the earlier FASTA stuff. We didn't see more of this stuff start cropping up until of course, you saw it. Stop moving. What is that doing that for? Well, I'm not budging the table. Okay, so maybe it's me doing it on the table. So, all right. The non-battle mech stuff, the industrial stuff. The idea is that the inner sphere and the periphery are full of these things, and they're literally outnumbered probably battle mechs by 100 to 1, but they're not intended for combat, so they're not armored. Most of them use internal combustion engines, and their infrastructure, their framework, everything's not suited for standing up to any kind of serious weaponry. And the fact that people in desperation will arm them and try to crudely armor them is laughable, but also understandable. I mean, against lightly armored infantry and infantry using soft-sided vehicles, a lightly armored and armed harvester mech could be a threat. It could be a problem. So to find these things that exist and to put them into use in creative ways is reasonably within the parameters of the game as far as I'm concerned. The other thing would be that unfortunately we didn't start seeing any introductions of these things being really seriously utilized outside the Grey Death Legion's earliest, the first book, Decision at Thunder Rift, and then the follow-up book, because this is kind of what happens when you're a bunch of freedom fighters are fighting for their freedom, or etc., and they got to make use of what they have. it's not until the advent of the so-called Dark Age that I start hearing, well, the Inner Sphere basically turned all their weapons into plowshares and destroyed all their mechs and turned everything over to the Republic, or they diminished for the sake of peace. And then when things started to heat back up again, and we see a rash of impromptu industrial mechs, and we still see them in limited applications cropping up even in the novels of the current era. So, I mean, right? It was the one more thing that really kind of threw me off when FASA bellied up and WizKid and FanPro started working together to be different. It really, without really understanding how that was playing out in the early days, it just added to the confusion in my head and made it harder for me to support the franchise and easier to walk away from it. And while we're back to that, I wish I had stuck it out a little longer. I stuck it out for a better part of a year and a half after FASA officially closed, but I didn't realize that FanPro was about ready to start ratcheting things up until after that. And of course, I stopped going to the game store altogether and other things. It just wasn't in the cards. Money wise, it just wasn't there. So if you can't shop, if you can't afford to buy things, don't go shopping. That's something I've had, I had to learn. You're just asking for trouble. So anyway, this is a nifty TRO. And you can get this obviously as a PDF. And I actually got this PDF off the internet for free, and I was grateful to get it for free because everything I can get for free saves me money. Goes without saying. So once again, you can get this for pretty cheap as a PDF from Catalyst. So hey, it's worth getting if you want it. I mean, if you find uses for this thing, if you can get it for free like I did, and I just Googled, BattleTech Technical Readout Vehicle Annex free, and it popped up. So, see that new light I put up there. So I turn it off. See, that's the glossy stuff. The downside, of course, is that it reflects off these glossy page covers, and they did the same thing on the other books. But so I can pull that back. And when I had the person who put together the one for my game material, they took two of these plastic sheets and put them back to back and somehow glued them together, or they used a different type because the cover I have is literally embedded in it and not just kind of clinging to this. So I didn't want to waste it. It was another $20 to get 100 of these plastic doohickeys. So in theory, I got enough stuff to do 50 freaking PDF books if I want to. I'm not likely to do so, but it's there. Anyway, you know how this goes. Going on, my friends, this is Rick, and hey, if you like the channel, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, tell your buddies, tell your friends, tell your coworkers, tell anybody else that's in the gaming industry or gaming fandom that says, hey, this is a channel worth checking out, right?